It's Tuesday, January 27th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. I'm back from a week off for some medical leave, and we have a lot to talk about, starting with the killing of another American at the hands of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, by now, you've probably seen the videos of Alex Pretty's death, likely from multiple different angles. So I am going to walk through a little bit of that, but mostly we're going to be talking about what's happened in the days since the shooting, because it would seem that Minneapolis stood its ground and the White House blinked. But first, make sure you're following or subscribed to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Become a paid subscriber to the Make It Make Sense Substack for just $5 a month, where you'll get access to all kinds of weekly original reporting and newsletters, including the Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter, where this week's edition is all about how governments even have power, how the founders of our country thought about that, and why they also thought it might be an obligation for citizens to overthrow their governments. And I promise it's not advocating, just educating, but all of that is just for paid subscribers. Okay, when we come back, DHS kills a man and runs away. It's January, which means half the country is doing dry January, and the other half is asking, does wine count if I'm mad at the news? If you've ever tried dry January, you know the problem isn't willpower, it's standing in your kitchen at 9 p.m. holding a can of seltzer and promising yourself it's the same if you close your eyes and ignore your sense of taste. Well, that's where Reserve Collective botanical drinks come in. Reserve makes non-alcoholic beverages with plant-based ingredients, so you'll still get that feeling, just without the hangover, the regret, or waking up to text messages you don't remember sending. It still feels like a drink. It still feels like a ritual. You don't black out during the documentary you were pretending to watch. Dry January, at least for me, isn't about suffering or even really sobriety. It's about a reset at the beginning of the year after a few months of the holidays where we all rightfully celebrated. Right now, you can get 30% off your next order from Reserve Collective with the code in the show notes. Mims does get a cut of that, but it helps support the show stay up and running. So if you're doing dry January or you're just taking a break from alcohol, check out Reserve Collective Botanical Drinks. Same vibe, fewer apologies. All right, let's get on with the show. On January 24th, just this past Saturday, a group of at least 8 Border Patrol and ICE agents were walking through a section in Minneapolis when they noticed they were being observed by a group of 3 people. The agents walked up to them, shoved one of the women, and then as 37-year-old VA intensive care nurse Alex Pretty, who was with that woman, started helping her up, agents pulled him away from her, pepper sprayed him in the face while he held his phone up in one hand and an empty hand in another, shoved him to his knees, beat him in the face, found his gun, which he had a legal permit to carry, illegally removed it from him, and then shot him while he was on the ground. In the videos, at least 12 shots are heard, while no less than 6 DHS agents are on top of him. According to witnesses and to those videos, Pretty's last words were, "Are you okay?" which he said to the woman he was helping up. "Are you okay?" Immediately after the shooting, DHS gave an image to Fox News claiming to be the weapon agents pulled off Pretty, claiming he came at them armed with the intent to massacre law enforcement. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said he fit the definition of a domestic terrorist. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's entire immigration campaign of terror, which is how, by the way, a federal judge described it, called this ICU nurse a domestic terrorist, again alleging that he was a would-be assassin. The now former Commander-at-Large of ICE Operations, Greg Bovino, a dude we'll be talking about a lot today, went on national TV this weekend and said Pretty intended on harming agents who were just afraid for their lives. We still don't even know if that picture of that gun that was given to Fox News was actually of the gun that was pulled off of Pretty. And with an agency that lies with such ease and frequency in DHS and with ICE, at this point, playing you or reading for you the things that they are saying feels like journalistic malpractice unless I or another highly trusted news source can verify them on their own. And before I go on, this is something that we do have to reckon with. That the Department of Homeland Security, that ICE, have engaged in so much misinformation and outright lying that what they're saying can't be believed as political spin, let alone the truth. We saw it after the death of Renee Good, where Kristi Noem made up this story about her killing, alleging that ICE agents had been stranded in the snow and were desperately trying to get out as a mob closed in, and then Renee Good floored it, turning her SUV into a missile. None of that was remotely close to the truth. A federal judge said that while he was running his operation in Chicago, Bovino lied multiple times while he was being deposed under oath about the reasons he used force against protesters. So, perjury. A medical examiner recently ruled the death of 55-year-old Geraldo Lunos Campos, who was in ICE custody in Texas, was a homicide, after ICE initially said it was a medical distress issue, then a suicide, and then said Campos died while he resisted agents who were trying to stop him from killing himself, and then said that he died while they were trying to save his life, except for the last time I checked, CPR doesn't include compressing someone's throat until it closes. So what we have is a federal agency that now has a budget so big that it would make many militaries across the world blush, lying to avoid accountability as it kills American citizens and people in its charge. In fact, 2025 was the deadliest year for DHS since its first full year as an agency in 2004, and the deadliest year since 2020, or, the last time Trump was in charge of it. And what we need to think about here is, what does this mean if we can't get a true picture of what this agency is doing? If we can't have a basic understanding of reality, it's nearly impossible to get accountability. But we'll come back to that idea a little later. Because after Preddy's death, it seemed to be the final straw for a lot of people, including legal experts and elected leaders. Ryan Goodman, a professor of law at NYU and the former head lawyer for the Department of Defense, called Preddy's death an execution. So did Washington Senator Patty Murray, who is the vice chair of the very powerful Appropriations Committee. Harvard law professor and former FBI Joint Terrorism Task Forcer John McLaughlin called it first-degree murder. And Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts posted this.
What we just saw this morning on the streets of Minneapolis is another outright murder by federal officials. And let me just be clear. Those federal ICE officers are absolute cowards. I'm a Marine veteran standing here telling you to your face they are unprofessional, pathetic cowards.
That is real anger from a sitting member of Congress, something we don't often see from them, and certainly not something we get a ton of from Democrats. Sure, there's a lot of outrage, but anger, that's different. But it wasn't enough for DHS in the first few days, because the department is now saying it's going to be running its own investigation into the shooting, despite having fabricated the narrative about it from the start and also having no prosecuting power, which is why the FBI, or in this case, more likely state authorities, investigate these things. And Governor Tim Walz made that clear this weekend.
And second call is, with no uncertain terms, that we will investigate this. We will not be stonewalled. What we've already seen, and you saw it this morning, before any investigation is done, you have the most powerful people in the federal government spinning stories and putting up pictures, and unrelated people who we don't know anything about, and a picture of a firearm to try and spin a narrative. And I ask Americans, this will end when enough Americans say this will end. Do I have any confidence Donald Trump will do the right thing? No.
He also called in the National Guard to keep citizens safe from ICE, and that he'd said he'd send the invoice to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
I would note on this one, too, that we'll be billing the federal government for the cost of the National Guard because they are incurring the costs that are falling on us by their reckless actions.
Not for nothing here, but that is the Tim Walz that Democrats probably wanted to see in the campaign trail in 2024 and just wasn't allowed to do it, but that's a different episode for another time. What ended up happening was the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the state's FBI, so to speak, said they've been shut out from yet another investigation into the killing of a Minnesotan by DHS. And images showed Preddy's clothes being protected by protesters because hours after the shooting, they were still on the ground, having not been collected by DHS or ICE. And authorities have been so worried about DHS's record of dishonesty in public and in court that a federal judge ruled this week that DHS has to preserve evidence for an investigation. But ICE has refused to follow court orders in Minnesota and across the country, so much so that a judge issued a ruling today that said the head of ICE, a guy named Todd Lyons, has to appear in court in person on Friday in Minnesota to explain why ICE isn't following the law and the court's orders or face his own arrest and contempt of court charges. The judge said in his 3-page ruling that was so angry, was practically crackling with disdain, the court's patience is at an end. And it's here that I think we should talk a lot about what I think a lot of you are yelling at me in your cars right now. What good is the law if the Trump administration isn't going to follow it? It's here. It's for these people. It's for the people who aren't Trump or his inner circle. Trump sees his people and his supporters as disposable. If Todd Lyons goes to jail for refusing a court order, Trump isn't going to bail him out. He's going to deny responsibility and make Todd a patsy. It's how we've seen Trump operate over and over. When Trump was asked this weekend by the Wall Street Journal if his support was behind the agent who shot Alex Preddy, he refused to give it, saying, "I don't like any shooting. I don't like it." And then we got the biggest betrayal of all this week. Late Monday night, the news broke that Greg Bovino was out of his job, or his current job, as the overall commander of Trump's immigration operations. This is a guy who has overseen some of the most public and aggressive ICE operations in the last year. He was the favorite of the MAGA crowd, and DHS even posted weird fan cam videos of him that I and many other journalists pointed out showed him looking a lot like a Nazi, as well as looking like he's doing something like giving the Nazi salute. But the news and the backlash have been so bad, and Bovino has been the face of so much of it, that he's being sent back to his job as the head of the El Centro California Border Patrol Station, where he's expected to retire from very soon. And there are even rumblings, like friend of the show Mike Nellis talked about over on his podcast this week, that Kristi Noem might be next, but more on her in a second. But the point of this is that when judges make these rulings, they're not really talking to the White House, per se. Instead, they're sending a warning to the people the White House will discard. Now, the man who's coming to replace Bovino is Tom Homan, Trump's border czar, the guy who led his family separation program during the first Trump term and who recently has butted heads with Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller, who are somehow more extreme than Tom Homan, but really it's that Homan doesn't like how in our faces the violence of ICE has been. Homan is not some PR genius by any means, nor is he some softy on immigration. That's not why he's in this job. He's in this job because he spent his career being good at one thing: deporting people. So much so that Barack Obama gave him a medal for it. But Obama drew the line at separating kids from their parents. And when Trump came into office, Trump liked that idea and Homan ran with it for 2 years before leaving to join the Heritage Foundation, the now far-right think tank behind Project 2025. And Homan has marinated in that for the last 7 or 8 years and came out of it more extreme. So he's not a step away from what we've seen from ICE and DHS as much as he'll be a more competent hand at the wheel. But Homan's entrance also means a number of ICE agents will be leaving Minnesota, where the heat got to be too much for ICE, pun intended. And that, I think, says something about the mission of the agency overall, that if their mission in Minnesota was really there to be targeted enforcers of immigration laws, these agents leaving means ICE could have done this the entire time with fewer people, that there was never a need to have this surge of masked and armed agents looking to pick fights, walking through neighborhoods, making random, likely illegal citizenship checks, and deporting toddlers to get to their parents. All that then gets us to the last thing here. In the days since Preddy's shooting, it's been, like I said, the last straw for a lot of lawmakers, many of them Republicans. Senator Rand Paul has now called for the heads of DHS and ICE to be grilled on Capitol Hill, something that did not go very well for them last time. And he's been joined by a handful of other Republicans in the Senate who are demanding accountability and those answers. House Democrats are now eyeing investigations into Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller to impeach Noem and force Miller's resignation, though just this afternoon Trump said he was standing by Kristi Noem, and Stephen Miller has become Trump's closest Grima Wormtongue-like advisor for you Lord of the Rings nerds out there, so his ousting feels really unlikely. But most importantly, a number of senators who will have the job this week of debating whether to keep the government open and DHS funded, because we're back to that again, they've said they can't in good conscience vote to fund ICE or DHS at its current price without more guardrails and restrictions. Some of those voices include senators who crossed the aisle late last year to vote with Republicans to end the shutdown, like Nevada's Catherine Cortez Masto, who wrote this week, "This is clearly not about keeping Americans safe. It's about brutalizing U.S. citizens and law-abiding immigrants," before she said she won't vote to fund DHS. So we'll see what happens next, whether the head of ICE will show up in court or have U.S. Marshals sent to collect him with the force of a subpoena, whether Tom Homan will continue to escalate what's been happening in Minnesota, or if he'll make good on Trump's threat to look back into California next, and whether this week's budget fight will be the week where senators on both sides actually hold the line against the U.S. sliding into a dictatorship, or if they will, again, let Trump have his way with the country. More of that to come on Thursday. But for now, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. It really helps boost the show on that platform. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where you'll get access to all kinds of weekly original reporting. I'm really excited about the piece about the Olympics that I'm putting out tomorrow, and you get access to the Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter, along with other bonuses and access to the subscriber chat. It is just $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.